Some consider Chinese telecom giant Huawei a top threat to American domination in the wireless technology world, and some consider it a threat to national security. White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro was on Squawk Box on Friday. He had this to say about the company.
The only thing that Secretary Ross is going to allow to be sold to Huawei are things that they could buy from other vendors worldwide. And so if we don't have that kind of policy, we're harming our own American companies. So we're threading that needle beautifully, and it's a relatively small amount of sales in the neighborhood of less than $1 billion, which is small in the scheme of things.
And here to discuss all this, Robert Spalding, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. Previously, Rob served as Senior Director at the National Security Council, where he penned a memo outlining how to redesign the Internet from the ground up in order to leapfrog China and protect the United States from espionage. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So help us understand what's going on here. There is a view that by allowing Huawei to trade with anybody at all, that we are giving them some wiggle room to continue to grow, and that is a bad thing. What do you think?
Well, I think the entity list is designed to prevent sales of Western and allied equipment, U.S. and allied equipment, to companies that are deemed to be a national security risk. There was an executive order stating that there was a national security emergency with regard to Huawei. That's when our telecoms were told they can't sell that equipment. And then they were put on the entity list, and that entity list gets repeated through 42 countries that are part of the Washington arrangement that also agree to not sell their technology. One of which that's on there is Russia. So it's an interesting.
How much of this is about slowing Huawei down across the board so that they're not going to be in Europe, they're not going to be in Africa, they're not going to be, I mean, they're going to be in China by default, but to effectively give some U.S. companies some room to effectively set the standards for not 3G, for 5G?
Well, I would support that, but that's not what this is about. The Washington arrangement is about not selling equipment to Huawei. It's not about not putting your Huawei equipment in your networks. That's still a debate that's ongoing. And
where do you land on that question?
On that question, I obviously agree that we shouldn't put Huawei in. And it's not about do you trust Huawei or not. It's do you trust the Communist Party not to take the data and do things with it that you don't agree with.
And let me ask you a flip of that question. I've talked to Chinese executives and officials who said, Andrew, if there was a war between the U.S. and China, don't you think that the U.S. government would call Intel, Qualcomm, Cisco, and every other U.S. company and say, we need your help? Is there either a backdoor or a way for us to check this out or this out? And the companies would comply.
Yeah,
what do you say to that?
We're not talking about a war. What we're talking about is you going about your business day to day. Even here, you're reporting something, you do something, you say something about Xi's family, right? And then there's some kind of financial arrangement with CNBC, and then they say, hey, we don't want him talking on air anymore. This happens all the time in China, and it's beginning to increasingly happen in Western countries. There was a guy, Roy Jones, a mid-level employee, Marriott Corporation, that got fired for liking a tweet about Tibet.
When you see the CEO of Huawei say, look, so far it's been a hands-off situation. We have not been influenced by the Chinese government. Do you believe him?
Well, Finite State just put out a report. The interesting thing about that, it went through thousands of pieces of equipment, firmware for thousands of pieces of equipment. Some of them had their firmware updated when they were told, hey, you've got a problem here. That same problem was moved to another area of the firmware. So you say, well, how can that be that they could take that mistake and propagate it somewhere else so it could be hidden? So there's something going on here.
Rob Spalding, come on back. This is a great conversation. There's a lot going on, and it's going to continue.